right, well, welcome to the Kidlit Social June edition, first June edition. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight, and I'm really excited to have a very interesting guest that we're going to talk to in a few minutes. If you are with us for the first time, my name is Laura Backus. I'm publisher of the Children's Book Insider newsletter and co-owner of writeforkids.org and writingblueprints.com. And if you are here for the first time, you want to get on our list and be notified of all of our upcoming guests, go to writeforkids.org/ultimate cheat sheet, and you will get on our list and you will get a free ebook where we have compiled 32 years worth of beginning children's book writing knowledge into one handy ebook. Which is a great reference, even if you've been writing for a while, because sometimes you forget, especially if you're switching like age groups and you go from picture books to chapter books, and you go, well, how long should a chapter book be? And, that's the kind of stuff that's in this ebook. And then you'll be notified of all the cool stuff we do. And we have a special offer just for you all of our Children's Book Insider newsletter, which is celebrating its 32nd year of publication. $5 a month, writeforkids.org/CBI. You'll get it averages 20 pages a month, the e-newsletter delivered to your inbox every month. And one of our great features is we have a special interview with either an editor or an agent every month, and they give us an above the slush pile opportunity. So you get to submit your pitch through a form through us, and it will jump over the slush pile. You will get read first. Or if the editor or agent is not taking submissions, they will take them from the above the slush pile pitches. So that's really cool. Plus we have other marketing information, etc., etc. So check that out. So now we get to celebrate. We have some good celebrate. If you were with me last week I did a special makeup social. Normally it's the first and third Tuesday of the month, but I had to cancel one because of us being sick. So I did a makeup last week, and I had 6 amazing celebrates. This week we have 4 amazing celebrates, I think. So Carrie Keegan has released her first children's book, Hearting with Herman, You Are Never Alone, which is the first book in a series about values such as empathy, self-confidence, and inclusion. And it's offered in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. And it just won as a finalist in the Inspiration Fiction category of the 2022 Indie Book Awards. That's awesome. And so the Hearting with Herman Undersea Activity book has just been released this month. So go check that out. That looks really awesome. Lori Fortino writes, I'm thrilled and honored to have been chosen as the 2022 recipient of the Kate Dopirek Craft and Community Award for my picture book manuscript entitled Jinpa and the Dust Cloud Dogs. So that is awesome, Lori. Congratulations on that award. And that is going to make your query letter look even better. So let us know what comes of that. This from Publishers Weekly. Our friend Natasha Wing sent this in. Natasha's on the right. Children's authors Laura Riesau, Natasha Wing, open their trailers and part-time studios for an outdoor book event, Tales from the Trailers, held on May 22nd in Fort Collins, Colorado. And it's really cool because they, between the two of them, have 3 trailers that are manufactured in the 50s and 60s, vintage trailers, named Peachy, Winnie, and Little Blue. This is Little Blue right here. And then they also had a meet and greet with author Tara Dairman, who is on the left there. So what a great idea for a book event. If you have these cool vintage trailers that you use as maybe your office or some studio or something, open it up to the public and they can come check it out. And it's a really good way to draw people to your event. So this is awesome. Dana Alt, who is one of our longtime members and socialites, she has 2 offerings for you all. She says, The first is my Kidlit Connect critique group. We meet 6 to 7 times per month with online groups which meet on alternating Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Anyone who is interested may email me at dana.alt.author@gmail.com, and I will send the info in a survey to get them started. Once a month, we have a meet and greet where we talk about all things writerly. So that's awesome. If you are looking for an online critique group, this is an amazing opportunity for you. And then the second thing she's offering is her Writer's News Share, which is a free newsletter that she sends out where she shares all sorts of interesting info that lands in her inbox, such as workshops, programs, scholarships, awards, and publishing opportunities. So if you would like to receive that, which goes out 1 to 2 times a month, you can request it at the same email, Dana, DAYNA, .alt, AULT.author@gmail.com. And please write that down because I'm not going to go back to this slide. But thank you, Dana. That's a wonderful offer and opportunity for all of you to connect with each other and to get even more information about the industry. And finally, Laura Smetana, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, Laura, says, my new picture book, Ice Cream with Grandpa, a loving story for kids about Alzheimer's and dementia, illustrated by Elizabeth B.P. de Morales, is now available at online booksellers, just in time for Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. It was also the 2022 Maxi Award Children's Book runner-up, which is amazing. And this book is a wonderful story inspired by the relationship between my dad and son. Ice Cream with Grandpa is a loving picture book that gently explores dementia, aging, and loss from a child's point of view. As his grandpa's health declines, a grandson discovers their special bond remains strong through shared love of ice cream. And the book includes a guide for parents on how to talk to kids about all of these issues. So that is a very important book, much needed, and thank you, Laura, for writing it. Good luck with it. So I want to hear your good news. Send me an email to mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line. And I will feature you on a future Kidlit social, and no celebration is too small. If you get that query letter written like you've been trying, let us know and we'll celebrate with you. And I have a celebration. So tomorrow, we are offering one of our webinars called The Transformative Power of Outlining. And this is a really interesting and innovative webinar. Our presenter, Jez Trudell, who did a webinar for us last year on the 5 different story endings called Finish Big. If any of you took that, you know how great she is. She walks you through 6 or 7 different types of outlines that are based on different story structures. She shows you how they help you get your sort of thoughts in order so you have a much better first draft. And then she gives you suggestions on which type of outlines might work best for different kinds of books. So most of us are like outlining, no, we don't want to do that. But she is not a planner. She's a pantser when she writes, but she says she uses outlines and it makes her life so much easier. So if you want to sign up, you can go to this link right here, bit.ly/outline22. It's tomorrow night live at 6 p.m. Mountain, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. But if you can't make it live, you will get the replay, lifetime access, and you save $20 by registering at this link. It's $47, and it's going to be about an hour and a half. It's a very good value. So I hope to see you there. Okay, great link of interest here that I want to share for all you picture book writers. This mentorship called PB Rising Stars pairs up-and-coming mentors with up-and-coming mentees for a mentorship experience. And so the mentors are all agented published authors, and they are ready to give back and mentor an aspiring author. And so the mentees that are chosen will get manuscript feedback and help navigating the publishing world and exclusive workshops. So go to pbrisingstars.com to find out more information. The application process opened yesterday, and it's open through June 11th. So you don't have a whole lot of time. And then they announced on July 1st who was awarded the mentorships. And then July 5th through September 30th is when the mentorship happens. And it's all virtual, through email and probably Zoom. So if you're a picture book writer, go check that out. pbrisingstars.com. All right. So now I get to welcome my guest. Chris Barton is the author of 23 books, primarily picture books, including the bestseller Shark versus Train and Fire Truck versus Dragon, the Cybert honor-winning The Dayglow Brothers, and Whoosh, Lonnie Johnson's super soaking stream of inventions, which has been included on 21 state reading lists. His new books that have come out include How to Make a Book About My Dog and Moving Forward from Space Age Rides to Civil Rights Sit-ins with Airman Alton Yates. So Chris and his wife, who is the YA middle grade novelist Jennifer Ziegler, live in Austin, Texas, and co-host the children's literature video series called This One's Dedicated To, which is a really awesome idea. It's these short little interviews that they do with authors, children's authors, about their book dedications, who they dedicated their book to, and the story behind it, which I think is fascinating because you could find a lot out about the author's inspiration for the book by hearing about their dedication. So that's really interesting. And on May 5th, Chris published a soapbox opinion piece in Publishers Weekly called Showing Up and Moving Forward, about how authors and illustrators can actively support school librarians and teachers in the face of book banning and pressure from lawmakers, often legislators, to keep certain books out of the classroom. So we are going to talk about all of that tonight. So Chris, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Laura, and welcome everybody. Thank you for spending part of your Tuesday evening with us.
Absolutely. So I wanted to start right off with this Publishers Weekly soapbox piece that you wrote. And it came out of your visiting schools in Texas regarding your book, Moving Forward from Space Age Rides to Civil Rights Sit-ins with Airman Alton Yates. So first, tell us a little about this book.
Good thing.
Yes. And what all happened when you got to the schools?
Okay, so this book came out in January, and since it came out, when I visit, I do a lot of school visits, and my in Texas in-person visits resumed perhaps earlier than they did in most parts of the country. But since the book came out in January, when I visited elementary schools, I've presented that book to fourth grade and up. My nonfiction, typically I do third grade and up, but moving forward, there were some intense parts to it. So I thought fourth grade and up feels right for this book. Alton Yates, Black man from Jacksonville, Florida. He's still living. He's 85 years old. He and I are still in touch on a regular basis, which just brings me so much joy having him in my life. When he got out of high school in 1955, he joined the Air Force and was stationed at Holloman Air Force Base out in New Mexico, where he got involved in these experiments to see what the human body could survive with regard to space travel, rapid acceleration, rapid deceleration, crash situations, if it was properly protected. And that had implications for air travel and for auto travel as well. He gets out of the Air Force as soon as he crosses back into Texas on his way home to Florida. He's back under Jim Crow, resolves when he makes it home, he's going to do something about that, and gets involved in the civil rights movement, and specifically in the NAACP Youth Council in Jacksonville, participates in the lunch counter sit-ins there in August 1960, which culminated in this horrific racist attack known as Axe Handle Saturday. And so this is really it's kind of three different stories. It's a story of what led him to the Air Force and his experiences there, this journey home to Jacksonville, and the civil rights activism that those previous experiences inspired him to participate in. And then what happened at some of my school, but I'd had no issues at all with kids, teachers, parents, administrators, anybody. I mean, I opened myself up to some uncomfortable questions. So I remember once I presented this book to a group of fourth graders, and the first question was, why were there Jim Crow laws if they weren't right?
Mm.
Kids are very savvy. They understand right and wrong. They get right to the heart of issues like this. But there was a district in Texas that I visited where there had been a lot of turmoil. A lot of school board elections in Texas have gotten very politicized. These have traditionally been nonpartisan elections, the same way lots of municipal elections are. It's gotten very politicized in the past few years, increasingly in 2022. And it had kind of created this climate of fear. And after I presented moving forward to a group of fourth graders at one school, in the very limited amount of time I had before the next presentation and the next presentation after that, I was asked by the librarian not to present moving forward to the fifth graders I was going to be presenting it to. And, my immediate thought was, it would be hypocritical of me to say I stand up and support librarians and educators in general, and then to just wholesale dismiss this request that she was making right then. But that was the second of several days of visits in this district. More requests came in afterwards to not present that book. And there was a lot of back and forth over in the days that followed, but the end result was that every class of fourth and fifth graders I was going to present the book to in the first place, I did present the book to. To me, the most important thing was getting this story to those kids. It was not about social media grandstanding. I didn't say anything about this incident on social media until the Publisher's Weekly article was written. My main objective was getting this story to these kids. But it involved lots of back and forth with the librarians. It involved understanding where they were coming from. That in the school where this initial request came from, it was fourth grade teachers concerned about the reactions of some parents of some fifth graders if the fifth graders heard this book and reported something to their parents, to this small number of parents that these parents would object to. So it was a hypothetical concern that they were afraid of. But I think that climate of fear it's understandable when that's what they hear. When people who value and appreciate and respect and support the work that librarians and educators, and by librarians, that includes public librarians, if what they hear are people who are angry at them or are displeased with what they're doing, and they don't hear people who support them, people who appreciate the work that they do, how can they not be swayed by what they hear over and over and over? And that was the thrust of the Publisher's Weekly article, is that we have to show up and show our proactive support for educators and librarians so that they will be insulated from those fears. So they'll know how many of us out there have their backs. It's not enough to say I support librarians. You have to actually show it and show them.
That's very true. And in many cases, depending on where these librarians or teachers are, their jobs have been threatened by having certain books in the classroom. So I understand them even imagining this hypothetical situation. And they themselves probably really wanted you to present the book to the kids, but they have all these other pressures coming from outside the classroom.
Well, and different schools have different leadership. In some schools, the librarians felt completely supported by their administration at the school. In other schools, they didn't. In some schools, I think the librarians personally felt more job security from perhaps having been there longer. Newer librarians or librarians newer to the district did not have that same sense of security. So you can't even just say, things are bad in this district, not bad in this district. Within a district where there are these pressures, some librarians are more susceptible than others.
Sure.
But all the schools where I did present, this book, the kids, it's been really striking to me how quiet the kids are when I share moving forward with them. You know, and I don't mean quiet and like they've gone to sleep. I mean quiet and they are engaged. They don't know where this story is going. There are things I say to them. I interject along the way to kind of put them in the shoes of the people that I'm talking about. It stands out from the other books that I've done. So I know the kids are getting the story. It was important to me that these librarians and I find a way that we're all satisfied with where these kids would get that story. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of back and forth. It took a lot of conversation, and I think it was 100% worth it.
Right. Are you able to share with us any parts of that conversation, even just in general, so that if other authors are in that position, they'll have some guidance?
Well, a big part of it was asking specifically what the concerns were.
Mhm.
What, because in one case I was told there was a parent complaint. Oh, it was a parent complaint at another school. Okay, well, what was, and politely but forcefully, what exactly was the complaint?
Mhm.
Turns out there wasn't actually a parent complaint. And so I think, for one thing, that's important to do is find out, get specifics from them, have them put into writing what the concerns were, or if they can't put that into writing, that's a sign to them that maybe those are concerns that they're really behind.
Mhm.
um, Another part was reminding them what this story is about, what moving forward is about. It's about courage, it's about sacrifice, it's about teamwork, it's about public service. And if you take the book, and I don't even know whether the concerns, the feared concerns, were related to the word civil rights being in the title, to the main character being Black, to the fact that I identify some of the white antagonists as being white, to the depiction of violence in the book, or
Mhm.
the threat of violence, impending violence.
Mhm.
I don't know what exactly they were concerned about, because it never actually got to the point of there being concerns conveyed directly to me.
Right.
But it was, it was looking for, hearing them out, hearing what they said that they needed. Then the concerns were presented to me as, oh, they were prepared for another book instead. I said, okay, I have a presentation where I can talk about both books. I can talk about the book that you say they were prepared for, and I can talk about, and I can do this presentation. So it's giving them what they said that they needed, what they said they were asking for, what they were expecting.
Mhm.
Not in any kind of, there was nothing disingenuous about it. It was a presentation. That combination presentation was one that I had done before. But I think it was also a matter of making sure that they knew that I know what the situation is that they're dealing with, and being directly in contact. Not everyone is able to put their thoughts. Not everybody's comfortable putting their thoughts in writing.
Mhm.
People you need to contact them, directly, um, over the phone. Sometimes if you say, hey, can we switch this conversation to text so that it's not coming through your district email address. It's sad that
Mhm.
we come to that, but some people need to have that sense of security that they can have a conversation with you
Right. Right.
that's not not subject to a Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think just, calmly and politely saying, can you tell me what the objections are, and having them spelled out is a really great first step, because you're right. A lot of times it's hearsay, or it's just a feeling that there might be objections and nothing concrete has actually happened.
Yeah.
Um, or the parent might have an objection to, like you said, the title of the book, and they haven't even read the book. So you could at least have something to address and discuss if you know what's happening. Yeah. So
And,
what
and
are
I,
some, oh, go ahead.
and just the fact that I was willing to have this discussion with them, I think
Mhm.
that meant a lot to them. I think they were
Yes.
prepared, the first school where this came up, I think they were prepared for me to be irate that it had happened. I was annoyed that it happened. I was sad that it happened, but I knew that the librarians and we are on the same team, and we have the same objective.
Mhm.
And if we can't talk with each other and find a way to work this out, that's a really troubling sign.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So what are some other ways that authors, even if they don't yet have a book to go into the classroom, how can they show up and support and give their presence of support to these teachers and librarians?
I think it's important to show up for boring meetings. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, school board meetings, library commission meetings. I have started this year. I have begun, even before this incident came up. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been attending every month that I'm in town, the monthly meeting of the Austin Library Commission. It is not an exciting meeting, but
Mm-hmm.
I would like to keep it not an exciting meeting. And I think that my presence there, or the presence of other people who are there, who appreciate the work that the library does, who value the work that the commissioners are doing, showing, being there in person. And if something were to go sideways at one of these meetings, they would have support from the public. That hasn't happened. I don't expect it to happen in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
But it could, and it's good practice, and it gives me the opportunity to tell other folks elsewhere, hey, here's something you can do. It can be for PTA meetings, it can be for school board meetings. It can be getting in touch directly with the librarians, or and letting them know, hey, I appreciate that you're doing this. I went to your branch and it's a beautiful branch library. Or, hey, I read about this thing in the library director's report that you're not, this person you get in touch with may not even be a librarian, but you see that they're doing this great, and they have this great initiative. Get in touch with them. Tell them you saw that, you appreciate it, just so the overall sensation that they get is that people are paying attention, people value what we're doing. It's not just the people who are disgruntled that books are different than they were when they were kids.
Mm-hmm.
And kids who don't look like them now have books that speak to them as well as anybody else. But yeah, the main thing is getting there in person, or sending messages directly to someone, not just putting it on Facebook, not just putting it on Twitter. Put it out there where the person is going, where the people you want to see the message are going to see the message, not just other people who you want to see that you are sending this message.
Right.
Let
Exactly.
recipients know.
Exactly. No, that's such a good point, because people tend to voice their opinion when they have a problem with something. And if things are going well, we just kind of let it go.
Yeah.
And I've started doing what you suggested in other areas. I write to certain lawmakers who I think are doing a good job. I will write them an email and say, thank you, and I think that's so important in our teachers. Our teachers deserve thank you notes all the time from everyone in the community. So that is such a great idea.
And I just put into the chat, I put a link to, I have a monthly newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
And the new issue just came out yesterday. It includes a link to that Publishers Weekly article if anybody wants to read that.
Great, great. I'm just copying that, so I'll have that to pass on to people later. That's great. Well, since we're on the subject of school visits, I know you do a lot of them. So do you have a couple tips if people are just starting to venture into the school visit territory on how to make them go really well?
Well, I think the most important thing.
Sorry, I'm going to repost this link because Chris, you put it to hosts and panelists. So I'll repost it here to everyone. I know it's easy to do that.
I put one in there earlier that was a
There we
link
go.
to this.
Oh yeah. Well, that was to YouTube.
Everyone. There we go.
Okay.
So tips for school visits. Once I think the most important thing is before the visit is communication between the author or the illustrator, the creator, and the librarian who's hosting it. It's typically going to be a librarian. Getting clear on the details of even just how long is it that they want you to talk. If they say the presentation is an hour from 9 to 10, is that I start talking at 9 o'clock, which means the kids are already seated at 9, and I stop taking questions at 10 o'clock and the kids can be out of there at 10:10, or is the expectation that no one comes into the room until 9 and everybody's gone by 10? That's a big difference between doing an hour-long presentation and a 35-minute presentation. And you don't know ahead of time what you're talking about. you might find yourself having to rush through things you thought you had plenty of time to go through. So that's just one example of the type of communication that's really helpful to have, and be very clear with the person who's hosting you about what your mutual expectations are, what you need, what they need from you. But when you're there in the room, I've never found anything more useful than standing by the door when the kids come into the room and greeting them, making eye contact with them. I mean, kindergartners often don't even know which planet they're on, so you may or may not get eye contact from a kindergartner. But it's great to see, and because the kids who do know, if they have been prepared, and that's the number one thing that a librarian can do, a host can do, is prepare the students, and the teachers can also prepare the students for this event where the author is coming in. The kids come in the room, they say, "Are you the author?" I say, "I am." They've seen pictures, they recognize who I am. You build that rapport the second that they come into the room. They're more likely to pay attention to what it is that you're saying, to really take seriously what you're saying, to remember, oh, this is a thing that we were told was happening, and start kind of getting in that mindset of, okay, there's someone here who I can hear some really exciting things from. And Q&A is especially important for an author visit, because we don't know what we can guess to a certain extent what it is that our audience wants to hear, but we're never going to guess all of it. And sometimes the most important thing for a kid is just to be able to ask a question to an author. You don't want to tell them everything that they're going to want to know, because give them the opportunity to ask that question. That was a big shift for me in switching from in-person visits to virtual visits when COVID came along. Was I needed to make a lot more of the time during my virtual visits, a lot more of that needed to be Q&A, because getting that interaction with them was so important. I never ran out of questions. We never got to a point where we had like a 45-minute presentation and 35 minutes in, there are no more questions. There are always more questions. Never worry that you're going to run out of questions. The older kids are, it can be tough. Sometimes, getting the first hand raised from a group of sixth graders can be difficult. They don't want to go first, but once someone does, this hand after hand after hand goes up, in my experience.
Great. Do you tell the teachers or the librarian ahead of time what books you're going to be presenting so that they can prepare the kids for that specific book? Do they read it to the class ahead of time?
I will typically ask, or I've recently started working with a booking agent, and so she will ask what books they're familiar with. What I've done in the past is just in the shared schedule document, I would indicate what book it is I'm going to be talking about. And just and I don't know if that means that they're going to avoid that book, or if they are going to read that book to prepare them so they'll be even more invested in that book. So, because often when I visit a school, I know that all the kids in the room have read the book. If I ask, have you read the book? Only half the kids are going to raise their hand, which I know just drives the librarians up the wall, because they have personally read that book, every kid in the room. So I will typically let them know what book that session is going to focus on. That was actually something that did not happen with the visits recently, and that's on me. That was a transition from organizing my own visits, booking my own visits, to work with a booking agent that I did not oversee. Kind of that switch to where, as part of the schedule, they know what book I'm planning to talk about.
Right. Okay, those are some great tips. So let's talk about some of your books then.
Sure.
I want to talk about how to make a book about my dog, because this is a really creative idea. So you say right in the beginning of the book that you got the idea of the book from questions kids asked you at school visits, which was basically, could could you ever write a book about your dog? Is that one of the questions that they asked you?
Yeah, so by the time I get to Q&A, and I will point out that I am illustrated throughout this book. It's kind of an odd thing seeing myself illustrated. I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but there I am. There's my dog Ernie. By the time I get to Q&A, even before I had this book, I would show a picture of Ernie because I'm no dummy. I know the kids like pictures of dogs. I would have shown the kids a picture of Ernie, and yeah, that was often a question: is are you ever going to write a book about your dog? But the other question I refer to on the opening page of this book is how do you make the books? And often what they're talking about when they ask how do you make the books, they're talking about the hardcover. They want to know, like, physically, how do you make that physical object? As if that stiff hardcover is the last nut they have to crack before they themselves are published authors. But I put those two ideas together. And the other origin of how to make a book about my dog came from the book. There's a picture behind me, a print of the art from Dazzle Ships, which I had a really hard time writing that book, figuring out how to tell that story. And at one point I was writing the manuscript for Dazzle Ships. It was called How to Write a Book About Dazzle Ships. And my editor said, she was so patient with me. She said, that's a really interesting approach to writing this, but it might work better with a subject that people already know something about, like, how to write a book about a dog. So I filed that away. And then, so that spark and the sparks from the questions in my school visits, that's what led to how to make a book about my dog.
Right. And do you think, first of all, are you able to tilt your camera up so we can see that whole print behind you? Because the art in Dazzle Ships is amazing.
Let me just raise it up a little bit.
And yeah, that's just one print, but that is a gorgeous book. And just give us a real one sentence description of what Dazzle Ships is about.
Dazzle Ships is about this weird type of camouflage that the Americans and British used on their ships during World War I to try to keep the Germans from sinking them.
There you go. And nonfiction, obviously, but the art just elevates it, to a completely different. It's almost a coffee table book with the art. It's just gorgeous.
She did a tremendous job with the art.
Right. Yeah. But so back to how to write a book about my dog. This book is really about the publishing process. So you walk kids through the publishing process, and I think it's a great book for aspiring authors to read as well, because you will see exactly all the parts of the publishing process, how many people are involved, how many decisions have to be made, even before they can give the green light on a book. Right. And then you have a timeline at the end, which is very honest, and I appreciate that. So how long does it take you to get a book out there? On average,
and I did the math various ways. On average, it takes about 4.5 to 5 years from the day that I start actively working on a book, not just talking about a book that I could make, or, hey, I've got an idea, I'll write this idea down and get back to it. The day I start actively doing something with that idea until the day it's published, it comes out on average to 4.5 to 5 years.
Right.
Typically a little bit longer for the nonfiction than for the fiction, but there's not that big a discrepancy.
Right, because of all the research involved with the nonfiction, that's what takes extra time. But I just think it's great. I'm going to start recommending to in all of my writing workshops, read that book. It's a good overview of the publishing process. But have you found that kids find that interesting, in the picture book format? Is this really, if you go into a classroom, they find this topic interesting?
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is the fact there's a dog in there, and there are some really stupid jokes throughout.
Yes.
Thank you for confirming that the jokes are stupid. No, it's my favorite dumb joke in here is when I get to the end and I talk about software. Lots of different types of computer programs are used to make books: word processing software, book design software, Ernie software. And when I read it out loud, kids say, Ernie software? I said, yes, Ernie soft here and Ernie soft here, and Ernie's very soft right here.
That's great. That's great. And Yeah.
But
No.
kids like knowing how things are made, and this is something that's fascinated me for so many of the books that I've made, whether it's Dayglow, the Dayglow brothers, or Whoosh, or the Nutcracker Comes to America. Is how did this thing that we kind of take for granted as an everyday part of our lives, how did this get to be? How did this come about? And that, you
Mhm.
walk into a school library, there are tons and tons of books. What's the story behind those? And so I think they
Right.
appreciate knowing how these everyday things they're familiar with got to be created.
Mhm. Well, and that leads into my next question. I wanted to talk a little about your nonfiction books. You have not quite an equal split between fiction and nonfiction. I think you have a few more nonfiction in print. Is that correct? Or have you counted recently?
Out of 23 books, I think it's 11 of one and 12 of the other, but I can't remember which was which.
Yeah.
There were six Mighty Truck books, including the 4 early readers, and that kind of
Mhm.
but makes things hard to keep track of. So
Right. But
it's
anyway,
more or less even.
more or less even. And I was going to say, sort of, how do you find your way into the nonfiction topic for the picture book audience? Because you have to be very careful to have that narrow focus and something that's really engaging to the reader. You can't tell every detail of a person's life. So, is it your curiosity about how this came about? Is that one of the ways you kind of get into the topic?
That's one of them. I mean, depending on the book, it's how did some part of our world get to be the way that it is? How did day glow colors get invented? How did this one old Russian ballet based on an even older German story become an American holiday tradition that hundreds of thousands of people go see every December? That's part of it, but also is there's some story that catches my interest one way or another, whether it's hearing a podcast about Alton Yates, the subject of moving forward, or a really kind of a chance visit to the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum that sparked my interest in writing about the Oklahoma City bombing.
Mhm.
Um, the main thing that I've learned is to hold off on on doing any writing as long as I possibly can. Because if you, in my case, at least, if I start writing too soon, I will make up my mind too soon about what the story is.
Mhm.
I will close myself off to potential avenues that I will want to explore, or that might be the actual story. And so the case of All of a Sudden and Forever, Help and Healing After the Oklahoma City Bombing, I did lots of research and database research, read books on the subject, went to did a return visit to the Memorial Museum and spent time in the archives, got on the phone with survivors and victims' family members and first responders. And only after I did all that research did the story come to me, the story I wanted to tell. If I had started writing when I just did the database research, it would have been a very different book, and I would not have been connected with the material in the way that I ultimately was.
Mhm. Yeah. And I want to talk about that book specifically. It's 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 a masterful book,
Thank you.
and it's very moving, and there's so many layers to it. It's one of those books that I think you need to read 4 or 5 times to even just get everything that you're doing with the book. Um, and I wanted to ask you, so you basically published this on the 25th, around the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right.
Were you worried that this topic would be sort of past and that publishers wouldn't want to bring it up again? Or are the things you talk about timeless enough that we
I,
need it?
I think that the things that I talk about are timeless, in that what I'm talking about is how different individuals, but also a community as a whole, respond to tragedy. Even
Hmm.
different individuals within a family. Someone might be grappling with this tragedy, whether it's a big public tragedy or a private tragedy. Someone might be grappling with it for years, and someone else very close to them, a friend or a loved one, might say, why can't you move on past that?
Hmm.
That's, of course, you think about that, of course, you think picture book. There should be, I wanted to. I wanted to talk about how the community remembered. I want to talk about grief and what that looks like over time, but also how the people who were so deeply affected by what happened in Oklahoma City in the days after 9/11. So that was 6 years later. They were in New York, New Jersey, presumably in Virginia, Pennsylvania, to lend comfort. Say we have been there. We know something of what you're going through, and the fact that you can take this thing that has been so difficult for you, and with the help that you receive, the strength that you receive from people who perhaps were themselves hurting, you can pay that forward to other people. I feel like that's a theme that we're sadly never going to stop
Right.
exploration.
Absolutely. Well, we see that happening now with the school shootings. We have families from previous shootings coming to comfort the current families. It's terrible, but you're right. That's something that we will always need. So this book, I imagine, I was thinking, you've tasked yourself with writing this book. How do you even start? And I love your first page. Can you read that for us?
Sometimes bad things happen and you have to tell everyone. Sometimes terrible things happen and everybody knows.
I just thought that was such a perfect way to begin it, because you're right down on the kids' point of view with that opening. You're not saying, let me tell you about this terrible thing that happened. You're acknowledging that there's a difference between bad things and really bad things, and the catastrophic nature of certain things makes them almost unbelievable.
Right.
But you didn't pull any punches with this book. You were very honest, not gratuitous with the violence or wording. You were very gentle with the wording, but very honest about what happened. And have you gotten any pushback on that from parents, teachers, anybody?
I haven't. And I'm going to be honest with you. Part of that is because really very few people know that this book exists. This book was published in early February of 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Middle of March, even with the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing just a month away, we're into the pandemic. And, I and my wife, Jennifer Ziegler, and the editor of All of a Sudden Forever and the art director, we all went to Oklahoma City for the remembrance ceremony on the 24th anniversary of the bombing. And I saw how much that meant to the people who were there that day. I can only imagine, for whatever reason, at least in this country, we really dwell on anniversaries that end in a 0 or a 5. And so I know that it would have been all the more meaningful for people in Oklahoma City that day on the 25th anniversary, or to have the country acknowledge this milestone anniversary of this tremendous part of our history, tremendously horrific part of our history. And it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So
you got upstaged by a pandemic.
But I know the faith so Learner Publishing put out this book, as with Dazzle Ships, as with How to Make a Book About My Dog. I know that they're behind this book. I know that they are behind this book for the long haul. I believe it will find its audience. I wish it did not take tragedy after tragedy for this book's usefulness to be shown again and again. But it'll be around for a while.
It will. Yeah, it is, like I said, masterful. And I think we'll move on here, but my last point was, is it important, and I kind of know the answer to this, but when you're writing about events like this for your young audience, to have some sort of hopeful thread that runs through it, or some thread that makes them feel like they can move on, or there are people out there to help, which is what you have through this story. Is it important that you find that before you even think about writing the book?
I think Yes, I mean, you may not know what that hopeful thread is when you start writing it, or you may not know exactly how it's going to play out. But I think, at least for me, I can't imagine taking on a dark, difficult subject and saying, "Well, here's how it is, kids. You're on your own." You have to give them something, something that they can use to process the story you've just told them, but also, you know, some way that they can relate to that to other things that they may experience or
Mhm.
firsthand or learn about. I mean, I feel like we
Right.
owe that to them to make it not just here's some tragedy, but what have we learned? What have we learned about ourselves? How have
Mhm.
we taken steps to make sure that this doesn't happen again? How do we honor, this terrible thing to happen while also continuing to move forward with our lives?
Right. And that's really the timeless part of the story, and that's what makes it applicable to other tragedies that happen. If you just focused on the specifics of the one event, the book would become dated very quickly.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, everybody go read the book and recommend it to all your friends. So I just have a couple more quick questions here, and then I do want to take some questions from
Okay.
viewers. We got started a little late, so can you stick around a little past the top of the hour?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So let's change and talk about something fun.
All right.
Your fiction has this wonderful silliness about it that I love, and it's interesting that you can have this sort of silly, big idea fiction, with a big hook and characters and stuff, and then also write these very serious nonfiction books. I mean, obviously, people can do lots of things, but your fiction,
Mhm.
to me anyway, either kind of falls under you have a really interesting idea that the story's built around, like your fire truck versus dragon. To me, that's a hook. Like right there in the title, we know what the book's about, and editors love that. They love hooks like that.
Mhm.
Um, or you have like really cool, unique characters like your Mighty Truck books, or that's not Bunny. He's a great character. So how do you get these ideas? Do you sort of come up with that sort of hook first and then figure out the story, or how do you do that?
I wish I had a process that I could repeat from one book to the next. I mean, Sharp versus Train was my second published book, my first fiction book, and I think it's probably still my best selling book. Well,
Yeah.
it's my only book of mine that was literally a bestseller. But that one popped into my head. It was I was out running one day because one of my kids was, when he was 2, 3, 4 years old, was really into reading nonfiction books about sharks, really into playing with wooden trains. So
Uh-huh.
I wish I could have mined the interests of him and my other kids along the way. Like, oh, they're into this. Well, I'll make a book about this. It has not worked out that way. Um, you know, I I read a picture book just about every night. My wife Jennifer and I have she's also an author of books for young people. We have an evening ritual called a read and a read, where we have a glass of red wine and read a picture book together. And
Huh.
so often the books that we love the most are the ones that make us think. I mean, that story was just out there all along. It seems so obvious. Why didn't I write that one? I mean,
Yeah.
just the other night we read. Off Limits by Helen Yoon, which is
Mhm.
adorable and hilarious. And it just seems so obvious. Not, I don't mean that in any sort of disparaging way at all. Like, that story was just right there for the taking, and she took it. She saw it. She pulled it out of the air. Like, why couldn't I have done that? And I kind of feel
Mhm.
like the best books, whether it's a character or a situation or just a title, whatever it is that brings you into that story in the first place, the best ones are the ones that make you, or make your critique partners feel like, why didn't I think of that?
Right. Yeah.
It's so obvious and so perfect.
You're right.
Yeah, another fiction example of mine was a book of mine called 88 Instruments. And this was a story that began, or a concept that began with a request from the editor. Can you write a book about a kid who's having a hard time deciding what musical instrument to learn to play? I think that was an experience that her nephew had. And I spent about 3 months just thinking, well, what can I would very much like to do that. And then one day, just thinking about the number of keys on a piano.
Huh.
And if, no, so no, obviously the piano is going to be the book that's going to be the instrument that the kid ends up with, but what if there are 88 different instruments to choose from? And I thought about the rhythm of the word 88, 88, 88. And that story came together pretty quickly once, once I zeroed in on the number 88. But for 3 months I couldn't force it to show up. I mean, maybe if I worked on it every day, I would have come up with something, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe it would have worked well or wouldn't. But I wish I could say here's how to write an engaging fiction picture book, because most of the manuscripts I write are not as engaging as those.
Well, and that's true. And I think that's good for people to know that doesn't matter how many books you've published, you have probably more manuscripts in a drawer than published books. And some of them don't deserve to be published because they're just not good enough.
And I always tell kids I learn from every story I write, and I especially learn from every story that I rewrite. Even if that
Mhm.
book does not get published, the work spent writing and revising those projects, they contribute to the stories that do get published.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my last question for you, and then we'll get to, there's just a couple in the Q&A.
Okay.
You've written 4 picture book biographies about Black subjects, African Americans, who have made enormous contributions to American culture, politics, etc. So with the current focus, and actually the focus the last couple of years on own voices
Right.
and letting people tell their stories, did you get any resistance to writing these books about these subjects yourself?
None that has been conveyed to me, or none that I have heard about, which does not mean that there has not been
Mhm.
dissatisfaction or concern about
Mhm.
that. Um, I think when you write any book, especially when you write a book outside your own culture, you have to be prepared for people to to hold you to account if you don't get it right. And that maybe that makes you say, well, I don't want to do it then. It's the stakes are too high, or well then I better get it right.
Mhm.
um, and in each of the people I've written about, Congressman John Roy Lynch, Super Soaker Inventor Lonnie Johnson, Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, and then Alton Yates, the subject of moving forward, I was just so compelled by their individual stories and by
Mhm.
the circumstances of of the country at the times that they or their parts of the country when they were growing up.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I felt drawn toward those particular stories. It was very important to me to get those right,
Mhm.
and editors believed I could do it.
Right. I imagine, and I'm just theorizing here, but I've heard editors talk along these lines that writing a picture book biography about a subject is very different from if you were to write fiction from the point of view of someone outside of your own culture. It's not impossible, obviously, but you have to be very careful to get everything, the point of view, the voice, everything right. Um,
I
so I
mean,
think that that's a slightly different situation.
I think even if you're creating a fictional character and you're not telling it in first person, if you're telling it in third person, you're
Right.
still inventing a person. You're still inventing a set of traits, a set of circumstances, a set of family history and culture. Um, I think that is a very different sort of challenge from um, interviewing someone, going to their actual documents of their experiences,
Mhm.
researching the world in which they live. I did I think 60 different sources for The Amazing Age of John Roy Lynch, 104 sources for Moving Forward. It's a very different type of writing when you have this documented set of facts that you
Mhm.
can go into. It doesn't make it
Sure.
easy, but
Mhm.
it's very different from using your imagination and trusting your imagination.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you. I'm gonna go, you've just got a couple questions here. Um,
And I had assembled 4 different links. I'll just put all 4 of those links into the chat. And what those are, it's the newsletter link for my
great.
latest edition of my newsletter, page on my website where all the books we've talked about and others are visible. The complete playlist for this one's dedicated to,
Excellent.
and the website of my wife, Jennifer Ziegler, who's the author of the new middle grade novel Worcester, which is my very favorite book in the world.
Yes. And I'm going to hit her up to be on the social. I haven't asked you that yet, but I would love to talk to her. That's great. Okay, so question here. Any feedback regarding your point of view of a tragedy when you were not directly impacted by it? So in writing about something, yeah, that's an interesting question.
I mean, I think that's where research becomes essential. You know, you read people's stories, or you listen to people's stories, or you talk with people. I reached out to many people who were directly affected by the Oklahoma City bombing. Many of them did not respond to me, which I can only assume that for whatever reason it was too difficult, or they were not interested. Either they had moved on or they had not moved on. For whatever reason, that was their prerogative. But there were so many stories out there to read, to learn. You know, we can write about tragedies that happened before we were born. We can write about tragedies that happened in previous centuries. We can write about tragedies that happened during our lifetimes that we were not directly affected by. That's a different book than writing about one that you were affected by, or writing about a tragedy and writing it from, say, a first person perspective, if that's not your actual perspective. So I think it all comes down to the research.
Well, and I think you try different approaches and see what feels right too, as you're writing the book. But I think the fact that you were not directly involved in that bombing that I know of, I mean, I assume you didn't know anybody who was there,
no connection,
allows you to have, I think, a better perspective, because if you had been involved, I think it might have been too intense for young kids to be conveying that level of emotion, or it would have been very difficult for you to pull yourself back so that you could be a little more objective about it.
And it's not an either or thing. There is room for books by people who are directly involved, directly affected, and there's room for books by people who aren't. You know, one thing that not being directly affected allowed me to do was to kind of give equal weight to the experiences of these 3 different constituencies in Oklahoma City: the victims' family members, the survivors, the first responders. Those were the same constituencies that had to find a way to work together to create that beautiful museum and that beautiful memorial. And so that approaching all 3 of those groups as an outsider allowed me to take their respective concerns with equal weight.
Right. Okay, thank you. Susan asks, what point of view should a writer select for biography? Narrative, third person, first person? Well, first person would be an autobiography, right? So how do you sort of figure out the viewpoint?
My third book was a nonfiction book called Can I See Your ID? True Stories of False Identities. It was a YA nonfiction book in which each of those 10 profiles was written in second person.
Cool.
I would say whatever works best for the story that you're telling. I've never written any, I've never taken on, I don't think I have. I've never taken on a first person persona in writing a nonfiction. I'm not writing a nonfiction book. I mean, in How to Make a Book About My Dog, I do talk about me, because so I guess in that case, yeah, I've written first, second, and third. So whichever one of those does the job for you. It just has to feel appropriate for that particular project. And if you're one of the great things about having a critique group is there's always someone in your critique group who will say, what you ought to do is write that in third person, or what you ought to do is write that in first person, or present tense or past tense. Whatever you've done, do something different.
Yep. Well, and also depending on your research, you may not have direct dialogue quotes that you can put into your nonfiction, and that changes the way
Yeah,
you tell the story as well.
right. And that's been, I mean, I guess I could have done that for, well, I helped adapt a memoir by Willie Nelson and his sister Bobby Nelson, who just died recently. She was his older sister. She was his piano player until she died at age 90. I recently adapted their adult memoir into a picture book, and so that one is told in first person, but it's their own first person perspective, just
Mm-hmm.
adapted down
Mm-hmm.
into a picture book.
Right.
Format. But yeah, I mean, if you do have the source material, it is possible to write it in first person. But that may end up being more of an as told to book
Mm-hmm.
than an original creation of your own. It's not to take anything away from the art of creative, of pulling together and excising and shaping first person narrative, but it's a different
Mm-hmm.
type of writing.
Okay, great. Do you have people you interviewed sign a release form to use their names and like, memories, opinions, etc. in your books?
To this point, I have not. That's been somewhat a seat of the pants approach over the years. I have one more nonfiction book that's coming out next year where my work is essentially done. But honestly, if I were starting a new nonfiction project from scratch right now, I probably would try to have something in writing. I've come to see ways that it can if everybody's in agreement of here's what this project is going to be, here's what I'm agreeing to, it's a way of potentially warding off
Mhm.
difficulty down the road. I
Yeah.
think I was always worried that it would be giving away editorial control or limiting what I'm able to say, my need to tell the story I want to tell. But I think working through that discomfort up front could potentially ward off bigger discomfort down the road.
Right. Yeah. Okay. How do you find a booking agent for school visits?
In the case of um, in the case of the agent I just signed with, her name is Sarah DeVore, and her booking agency is called How Now Booking. That came about through a mutual friend. It wasn't even somebody who was in the children's book business, just somebody I
Hmm.
knew from my old day job, whose kids had been taught by Sarah when she was a teacher. And
Hmm.
when she started her agency, he said it was one of these things where you're a neat person and you're a neat person. You're kind of in the same field. You should know each other.
Uh-huh.
So having that kind of in-person introduction, then it turns out another of her clients was a very good friend of mine. Uh,
Hmm.
but um, you know, I would think any booking agency worth its salt is going to be visible on Twitter. It's going to be
Hmm.
findable if you do a web search. Um, whether it's the right agency for you depends on, well, look at the clients who already work with them. Is there anybody that you know? Do the people who they represent are the people whose work you admire? How Now, I saw someone ask to repeat the name of the booking agent. Her name is Sarah DeVore. It's DEVORE, and the agency is How Now Booking. Um, there are a lot more booking agencies now than there were when I started doing school visits back in 2009. I think there's probably still room for even more booking agencies. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's a specialized skill set that comes in handy and frees up authors and illustrators to do the creative work that we're so good at, and to fully engage with the students instead of
Hmm.
also dealing with the logistics of setting those up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, great. And this is for John. He asked, I'm
Okay.
putting this website or this email in the chat box. He asked for a Canadian Kidlit group that he could join. So Canscape, it's Canadian Society of Children's Authors, Illustrators, and Performers. I put the website right there. That's where I would go check them out. They're out of Toronto, I believe, but I think they do stuff all across Canada. I know they do workshops and conferences and all sorts of stuff. Okay, I don't want to keep you all night here, Chris. You've been so generous with your time. So I so appreciate you.
Thank
We did have a question. Do you ever teach workshops? Would those be on your website if you did?
I don't have any regular workshops that I teach. I have taught some before, kind of in the division of labor in our household. I do a lot more school visits. Jennifer teaches at the Vermont College of Fine Arts in their MFA program for writing for children and young adults. So
Awesome.
she does some school visits. I do some teaching from time to time, but my focus has been on school visits and on making more books.
Okay, well, that's a good focus. We appreciate it. All right, well, thank you so much. This has been really, really great conversation. And we'll have the replay up tomorrow if anybody wants to rewatch it. So thank you so much, Chris, for being here tonight.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Y'all have a good night, everybody.
All right. Good night, everybody. See you in a couple weeks. Bye.